hello again to everyone for this presentation today, Reflections of Black Women through the lens of ancient Egypt. This is the EJ Network, and I'm so excited to be back again to do part 2 of this presentation today. Last time we ended talking about the cosmological concepts and how, to the ancients, particularly ancient Egypt, how that influenced how they perceived and looked at the women in their community, and how the women benefited in many ways from having that concept. We also talked about, Africa as being the mother of humanity and civilization. And I want to just say again that in this particular presentation, we don't really get too deep into that, but I have another presentation that's coming up after this, and it's actually a series. And the series is Ancient Egypt, or really Ancient Africa, I should say, Contributions to Civilization. And I get into in more details with the science, with the DNA, with the early remains and all those things, just to give more of a accuracy and more information and sources on that claim that I have presented. And so today I don't want to talk too much. I want to get right back to the presentation. And again, I want to thank you all for joining me today. This is the EJ Network, and I welcome you this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I want to say this again, even though I said in the last presentation, and this is just a copyright disclaimer under Section 107 in the Copyright Act of 1976. So allowances is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips to balance in favor of fair use. And so I want to say that because within this presentation, I do use videos, but it's for educational purposes. And so I want to make sure that I put that out there. So now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So I ended the last presentation stating the woman in the cosmos. The cosmos represented the feminine principle of creation to the African Egyptian / Nile Valley people. Therefore, to the ancient Egyptians, the woman was the earthly representation of the cosmic principle. Just like Nu, right? And Nu was that cosmic principle that the ancient Egyptians had, right? That primordial waters. Just like she gave birth to the atom, women gave birth to humanity. And particularly, if we want to be more specific, the African woman, okay, who was probably, from our research in East Africa, okay, gave birth to humanity, okay? So now we're going to switch a little bit, and this is Africa and a matrilineal society, okay? Africa as a matrilineal society. And I want to say before I begin that last session, the last presentation that I gave, I really didn't break down matrilineal and matriarchal and patriarchal and patrilineal. So I want to do that quickly. And we're going to talk about it as we move forward, but I don't want to just have the notion that people actually know what that word is. And so to quickly just give a definition, a matrilineal society is a society in which the inheritance goes from the woman to the children, okay? The women keep her name, okay? She keeps her land. She stays with her family, okay? And that's a very basic definition, right? I'm not really going too deep. Many of us are familiar with a patriarchal society or a patrilineal society. right? We even have a soft patrilineal society here in the West. And so how does that look? Well, in the West, we take our father's name, okay, when we're born. Most of the time, right? If you have uh parents, you most of the time you take your father's name. Now you can take your mother's name too, right? Particularly if the woman is not married, the child will continue on with the mother's name. But for the most part, you take your father's name, the last name, okay? And then in the ancient world, and even in some places today, right, in the Middle East and things of that nature, the land goes from the father to the son, okay? If he doesn't have a son, then of course he goes to his daughter, but it's his land. He owns the land. The woman, the wife, has no ownership of the land. And in many ways, when they get married, she's taken from her people, to his family. And so that's a patriarchal society. And I don't get too deep in this presentation, but I do get deeper in the presentations to come. So I wanted to clear that up, that when we talk about Africa as a matrilineal society, we're talking about inheritance, we're talking about name, we're talking about even many other rights that goes along with this type of society, okay? So now I do want to read a book, and I do encourage y'all to pick up this book. And this is by Cheikh Diop, and he kind of, talks a little bit about this, maybe not just a little bit, he actually goes in a lot about the matriarchal society that was established in Africa, okay? And the difference between that society compared to societies in the North, okay? So I want to start with page 32. And I love to read books. So anytime I can pick up a book and read it, I love to do so. All right, so this goes back to what I was telling you earlier about a matrilineal society. And this is on page 32 of his book. The biological heredity on the mother's side is stronger. So this is the belief that Africans had as it relates to biology, and why another reason they took on the inheritance of the mother, because of biology, okay, is more important than the heredity on the father's side, okay? Consequently, a child is wholly that which its mother is, and only half of what its father is. Here's an example taken from African beliefs which illustrate the idea, okay? And then he goes in and he talks about Senegal and different places that practice this belief. And he goes in and talks about magic and how that is stronger on the mother's side than it is on the father's side, and how children biologically through that inherit it more so from their mothers. And so I don't want to get into too much of that, but I guess I would say it is only possible to become a magician gifted with all the qualities thus described, that is to say, a total magician, if one is the child of a mother who is a magician. So this is just some African beliefs in the potency of the mother's biological makeup that is inherited and given to the child. Okay, so this is some really interesting things. And so we see here, not only from a cosmological perspective of this matrilineal society that we talked about in the last presentation, but we also see the biological component as well. And so let's look at the next one, is page 63, okay, and in this book. And so we've been talking about Egypt, right? We've been talking about East Africa and some of the developments as it relates. And so then we went and we talked about Senegal, right? So this is a cultural unity as it relates to this matrilineal society. So not only is it in Egypt, but it was throughout Africa. So we talked about Senegal and the idea of women having more potency of biology. based upon their belief system. Then he goes into, and he talks about places like Ghana in those ancient societies. And then he talks about in page 63, the Bantu. All right. So this is really important and very interesting. So Bantu are people who are in Central Africa, Central and South Africa. Okay, they talk about the Bantu expansion from Nigeria to all these other places. Even places in Nigeria, Ghana, they are also Bantu, Niger-Congo speakers. All right, so I want to read this. And this relates to the matriarchy of Africa. Most of the Bantu people of Central Africa determine descent in the matrilineal rather than the patrilineal line. And many of the practice among themselves a certain form of what is generally known under the name of matrilocal marriages. Okay, now you might say, what is a matrilocal marriage? So a matrilocal marriage is a marriage in which the woman, she stays with her family. Okay, so the marriage that we have today, right, where the woman gets married and then she may leave her home to go with the husband's family. Okay, that's a patriarchal marriage. But in this Bantu, the man leaves his family to be with his wife. Okay. And then I want to kind of go down from that as he talks about the Bantu of Northern Rhodesia. And if I'm really saying these words wrong, y'all, please forgive me. I'm, but I want to be respectful. But then he says in the next paragraph, it is clear from the statement that matriarchal regime existed generally in Africa in ancient times, as well as the present day. So as he talks about this, not only is it something that existed in the ancient world, but there are even hints of it existing today, okay? And that culture feature does not result from an ignorance of the role of the father in the conception of the child, okay? And so what he's saying is that they're not just matrilineal because they don't know the role that the man plays as it relates to conception and birth. But this is a part of their belief system because of other things, like we talked about earlier, because of the cosmos, because of this belief in biology, that the woman's genes holds more weight, more importance. It's not because they're ignorant of the man's role. So that's not what it's about. And that's what he wants to make clear. And I guess I will stop there, but I want to give an example of what he talks about even today. So with the Ashanti, right, of Ghana, the descent today is still matrilineal, okay? So the descent in today's Ashanti tribe in Ghana, in West Africa, the inheritance, all of those things is still from the woman to the children, okay? And I don't want to get too deep with that because I can stay on this all day. So the next thing I want to look at is, okay, so that is Diop, very great book. I encourage you to get it. But now let's look at some of the ancients. And this comes from John G. Jackson, The Introduction to Africa Civilization, another great book that I recommend. And so Africa's ancient matrilineal society. And this is Herodotus right here at the top, okay? He says, Herodotus noticed that the Egyptian women went into the marketplace and engaged in trade, while their husbands stayed at home and sat in the loom. And the sons were not compelled to support their parents, but that the daughters were obliged to do so, whether they chose to or not. So that's kind of different than a patrilineal society, a patriarchal society, right? And that what kind of threw Herodotus is the responsibilities that the women had, that the daughters had to take care of their families, and how the women were engaged in market. And in many of these markets, the women were selling their goods, they were selling their crops, and they were making money, right? And that kind of threw that these women seem to be very independent. Okay, so now we have Diodorus Siculus, and I'm probably saying that really bad, and please excuse me. So here's another ancient philosopher and ancient historian. And this is what he had to say about ancient Egypt. So we went to talking about the cultural unity of this matrilineal society. Now we're back to ancient Egypt. All right. So Siculus says, after reference to the matriarchal character of the Egyptian royal family, notes a similar state of affairs among the commoners, among private citizens, says that historian. The husbands, by terms of marriage agreement, appertains to the wife, and it is stipulated between them that the man shall obey the woman in all things. All right, now this is not my words. This is coming from Siculus himself from the book by John G. Jackson. These customs seem strange to the Greeks, but they were normal features of African societies. Now now we're talking about women through the lens of ancient Egypt, even in Africa, in the ancient world. We see now, as we begin to go to this next part, why the women in these areas, and particularly mainly we focusing on Egypt, right? Why they were able to do and have more rights, because of how they were seen and how they were treated fairly, more fairly, right? Than in other places. So now we go to women's role in ancient Egyptian society, okay? So now, this comes from Ivan Van Sertima, Black Women in Antiquity, okay? And I wanna read this. This is on page 157. For thousands years ago, or 4,000 years ago, women in the Nile enjoyed more legal rights and privileges than women have in many nations of the world today, okay? Equal pay for equal work is a cry heard now, but seems to have been the norm thousands of years in Egypt. Or you know, you think about that. Okay, 4,000 years ago, women in the Nile had more rights than some women do today. That is incredible. And we see this figure here of women education, learning in the new kingdom. You know, there are certain places, even today, where women cannot do this, but yet we have women studying, reading, learning different things, the nobility, right? And those who had the ability, that they were learning in ancient Egypt. And so that is remarkable. And it's because, yet again, because how they looked at women, women had more rights, the way they look at the cosmos, the way that they looked at the women's biology and potency, all of these different things gave women more respect than in other parts of the world. So now here's another source. And this is, again, coming from a great book by Ivan Van Sertima, Black Women in Antiquity, page 157, okay? Barbara Lesko, a female Egyptologist, had the opportunity to study private tombs showing evidence of men and women doing the same work side by side. This includes farm work, carting and produced to the storehouse, grinding wheat, brewing beer, and baking bread. There were also women scribes. The guide of writing, Sachet, was female. So now let's just take a moment and think about this. In his book, and the Egyptologist Barbara Lesko found evidence of women doing the same work side by side with their men. That is incredible. The fact that you have in the ancient world, women able to, you know, be scribes. So that means they were educated. That means they had the ability to read and to write, okay? They were farmers, right? They were doing things that, you know, in other places during this time was unheard of, okay? In other places during this time, women's roles were very limited, okay? They couldn't do as much. Many of them were bound to just being wives. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But their ability to get outside of that was limited, okay? And then in the same book, Ivan Van Sertima says, on a social level, there does not appear to have been the Egyptian equivalent of the all-male club like we have today. Women guests mingle freely with male guests and both served by servants of both sexes. The written record provides repeated confirmation of the equality of Egyptian women before the law. Now, now that last statement was cool, right? So before the law, they had a written record provided repeated confirmation of equality of women before the law, okay? So women had equal rights, okay? Not only that, but socially today, even though we live in the 21st century, we have this separation that goes on in many ways that, you know, you have the all male club, the all women club. And it's not to say that ancient Egypt did not have their own initiation rights for men, initiation rights for women, but the separation of the society was not as it is, or that it can, or that is still seen in many other places, right? In the West, we don't have that problem, right? So we mingle with the men, and men mingle with us, but in other places where women are subjugated, and when women are not seen as equals, there's more of this separation, okay? Moving on in the same book, page 159, women could buy property, sell, inherit, disinherit, and dispose of their property as they wish. So let's just stop there. In ancient Egypt, because remember, it's a matrilineal society, so they have ownership of this land, right? They own the land, so they could buy property, and I misspelled that, and I really do apologize. It should be B-U-Y, sell, inherit, disinherit, and dispose of their property as they wish. That is, now we're talking about in the ancient world, they had this ability. Those of us who are Bible readers know that the women could not sell, inherit, or do any of those things. But in ancient Egypt, they could. Women worked outside the home in many occupations. Of course, farming was the main occupation, but women also worked in trade as potters, bakers, weavers, doctors, and in some as teachers and scribes. So I think that's important. So the main occupation for women, because remember, the women were in the marketplace, right? Is that what Herodotus said? He saw them in the marketplace and he was stunned. Okay, so we know that was the main work for women, and they made money off of that. But also they worked in these other industries, which is also very intriguing for this time period. Okay, marriage contracts protected women property rights. So now that's amazing. So they had marriage contracts that protected the women. Okay, so to make sure that the women were treated fairly in terms of assuring her share in case of divorce. The contract was a private act, an arrangement, and get this, between equals. Now, some of you today, and I know in the 21st century, some of you may be hearing me and saying, well, okay, well, why is that a big deal? You know, we know we're equal to our men, and then, but if you think about it from a historical perspective, and even today, right, women still don't get the same amount of pay for the same amount of work. So it's not, even though we say it's equal, in many ways, yes, it's more equal, right? But we still have a ways to go, okay? And don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect there either, but the fact that they were able to get to that point, the fact that we are where we are today, we should be further ahead, okay? So this is something. And then here we have the lady scribe, Sheshet, the female founder of writing. So now many of us may know of, I think it's Tahuti, right? I want to make sure Tahuti is the male aspect of writing. But, you know, it's amazing. When I did this research, I had no idea that you had a female Sachette when I did this presentation 5 or 4 years ago. So now we talked about the women's rights in ancient Egypt and in Africa, this matrilineal society. Not only is it still somewhat practiced today, but it was definitely something that was practiced in ancient Egypt. Okay, so that's important as we look at ourselves as Black women and as women in general. I want us to know that there existed a society that did not look at us as last. Did not look at women as secondhand or second-class citizens. So that's important to know. So now we get into other important women in ancient Africa. And this is Queen Tai of the Berlin Museum. And we're gonna look further into, and she looks like a fierce woman, don't she? She looks like someone who doesn't play any mess. She's about protecting her people. And so definitely want to pay homage to her and then to her lineage as we move forward. So we're talking about important women in ancient Egypt and important African women. So now, this is Lady Prashett. She is the first woman doctor documented, okay, woman doctor in world history. Now, this is amazing. How many of you know that the first woman doctor that's documented in history was a Black woman, was an African woman? Okay. So she's the first documented woman in history. So let's read about her. And this is in the Old Kingdom. She lived during the 4th or early 5th dynasty. Okay, so we're talking about 2584 BC, before Christ. That's amazing. Lady Prashett was a woman doctor and the director of women doctors. So not only was Lady Prashett a doctor, which is amazing, but she was a director. So when we have female doctors today, just know that this woman preceded you, and she paved the way for women doctors. As we know, women in Egyptian society enjoy high social and professional status like men, all professions. Now, this comes from the source of Benga, African Philosophy, page 45 and 49. And I think this to me, I really highlighted this. I put this in bigger letters. All professions were open to educated women and men, including the clergy, administration, business, and medicine, among other fields. Only in ancient Egypt can this really be applied. Only in Africa, in this time period, could this really be applied. So now, we talked about Lady Prashett. So now let's look at Hatshepsut's Amos Nefertari, the 17th dynasty and great grandmother of Hatshepsut. You remember the woman that I told you that is the epitome of that word Ethiopia, that means burnt face? This beautiful woman in this great artistic expression. All right. And this comes from the same book, Black Women in Antiquity. One important office, and this is Amos Nefertari, and this is 1562 to 1494 BC. One important office she is known to have was the second prophet of Amun. Okay, and Karnak stele commemorates her, and this is the Karnak stele that talks about her. It commemorates her initiation into the office, which her husband bestowed on her. Now that's beautiful, right? Her husband bestowed this position to his wife. Okay, she is the first woman known to have held this post. It was one of the highest and most important office in the land. The second prophet was responsible for civil as well as religious function. She was also chief of troops. Now that's amazing. And had access and control over the priests, scribes, and servants. It has also been suggested that she exercised regency. This is a very powerful queen, very powerful woman indeed. Okay, so we know why Hatshepsut, 17th dynasty great grandmother Hatshepsut, why she was the way she was, because she came from such a strong line of women. So now we have Queen Hatshepsut. All right, we talked about her lineage. Now, earlier in the presentation, I told you that she was a pharaoh, which is something that, you know, even though ancient Egypt had women had more rights, the pharaoh, the king, was always majority of the time male. Because of the principle. Okay, we talked about the throne and the men sitting on the throne representing Horus, which is the sun. So the fact that she was able to take this position was amazing in and of itself. But not only did she take the position, but she thrived in the position. Okay, and so I want to read some highlights, and then I'm going to read page 188 in the book Black Women in Antiquity. So Queen Hatshepsut was in the 18th dynasty. So this is 1478 BC. And these are just some pinpoints, some highlights I want to just list. She was the great Black leader in Africa's golden age. Her reign lasted, check this out, 21 to 22 years. That is a long time. You're doing something right, something correct, if you're there for that long. She was the first great woman in history. She expanded foreign trade with other nations. She was a great diplomat. She looked over vast public building programs in Egypt. That's amazing. She was a fierce warrior in battle. Okay, so she wasn't just in the palace. She was on the battlefield. She increased the Navy for both commerce and war. She was also seen as a woman of peace and beauty. Okay, so now I've said that, but I want to kind of put all that together for you. Okay. Now, this is interesting. She is the only woman known to have actually ruled Kemet. She was the only one who actually was known to have ruled Egypt as the living Horus. She was both brilliant and beautiful. Okay. She was a lover of peace, like we talked about, and prayed for it frequently. Okay, so she prayed for peace. That's amazing. Hatshepsut was also a profoundly religious person and commissioned stupendous and awe-inspiring construction projects in honor of their gods. Most importantly, Hatshepsut well understood her family history, a history marked by illustrious deeds and proud traditions. Indeed, it was the knowledge of her family history which stretched back through Kemet's 17th dynasty. You know, we just talked about her great-great-grandmother, right? That served as the basis of Hatshepsut's own character and development, right? So now, let's look at, so we talked about Hatshepsut, we talked about her great-grandmother, Nefertari. So now let's look at Queen of Sheba. Now, some people may say, well, Queen of Sheba is not real, it's fictitious. You know, I say she's real, and I think she's an important woman because her role has still affected women today. We read about her, we're inspired about her story, and I think it's only fitting that we talk about Queen Sheba. Now, Queen of Sheba if you look at the Ethiopians, is said to be the mother of Makeda. And you know what, I might have said that wrong. I think Makeda is her name, but she is to be the mother of King Solomon's son. And that whole story in Ethiopia, to me, is a very interesting story. And I know I don't have time to talk about it today, but I definitely would like to talk about it, because there's some things in there I think that has a lot of importance to Christianity, and to people in that region, and really to Christianity as a whole. But I want to move on. So we're talking about Queen of Sheba, and Queen of Sheba lived 1,000, okay, 100,005 BC. She was appointed by her father during that time period, which is amazing. Okay. She ruled the Ethiopian Empire for, check this out. Now, they said she ruled it for 50 years. That, you have to be a strong woman. You have to be a mighty strong woman. So for 105,000, that's already amazing. All right, for her to be doing this during this time period, BC, before Christ. And then she ruled for 50 years. She governed a vast territory that included India, Arabia, Egypt, and Syria. She was also known as a great diplomat and was educated in trade in both land and sea. And so this is in Ezekiel 27:22-24. She was loved by Israel's third king, Solomon, like I said. She leveled the hospitality accord to Queen Sheba by Solomon was a tribute to her position and influence. Right, so the level of hospitality accorded to Queen Sheba by Solomon was attributed to her position and influence. It's pretty awesome. According to scripture, Queen Sheba achieved her goal in her visit to Jerusalem. And this is in 2 Chronicles 9-12. 9 and 12, King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba all her desires, whatever she asked. Okay, and this, again, is in Black Women in Antiquity by Ivan Van Sertima. All right, let me get out of this real quick and see where I'm at. Okay. All right. So now this is, so we talked about a list of women. Okay, we talked about a lot of women. And now we get to the Candace queens of Kush. So we kind of going down the time period in a sense. All right, so we started with the 17th dynasty, then we went to the 18th dynasty, then we talked about with Queen Hatshepsut, and then we went 100,005 BC with Queen of Sheba. Now we with the Candace of Kush in 332 BC. Now, one of the greatest generals in the ancient world was known as Empress of Ethiopia. Queen Candace embarrassed Alexander the Great. And this is really where I want to read as it relates to these Candace queens. There was actually a list of Candace queens during this time. Okay, so I want to read, and this is the book, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. And this is on page 118. And I want to just read for your hearing at this moment. Now he talks about these Candace queens. And I want to go down, and this is in the Battle of Alexander. So we know that Alexander defeated northern Egypt, right? We know that story, then the Ptolemies, we know all of that, but they've never really pushed further south, and there's some really good reasons for that. And so I want to read some of this. But one of the greatest generals in the ancient world was also the Empress of Ethiopia. This was a formidable Black queen, Candace, the world's famous as a military tactician and field commander. Legend has it that Alexander could not entertain even the possibility of having his world fame and unbroken chain of victories married by risking a defeat at last by a woman. He couldn't be embarrassed, right? He halted his armies at the borders of Ethiopia and did not invade to meet the waiting Black armies with their queen in personal command. So now we're talking about Black women today. Okay, and we're talking about women in general, but specifically Black women. All right, so I want to just say that women have played such an important role, all right, as generals, as regents, as pharaohs, as queens, right? We have this in our lineage, okay? All right, and that's an important thing to know, that these Queen Candace, and you know, the Queen Candace is also in scripture too, right? As it relates to the Ethiopian eunuch, but they played an important role with protecting their people, protecting their nation, protecting their country, okay? So now we switch from pharaohs and regents and queens. Now we're going to get to, as it relates to shifting back, because we talked about Lady Prashett, right, the doctor. We're going to go back and we're going to talk about Hypatia, okay, the mathematician and philosopher. Now, Hypatia is someone that I recently learned about, maybe 2 to 3 years ago, when I bought the book, African Philosophy by Thao Fanga. And that book, matter of fact, let me see if I have it really quick. Okay, so Theophilo Banga's book, and I said his name wrong, and I do apologize for saying it wrong, but I got it corrected. But in his book, he talked about Hypatia, and I may be saying her name wrong, and I do apologize. I'm gonna try to get these names corrected. But she was a very intelligent woman, okay? And I know some of y'all are looking at this woman and saying, is she an African? And I say, yes, she's an African. According to some of the traditions, her mother was an African and her dad was probably more so a Greek of that nature. So she was a biracial, more likely a biracial woman, all right? And she was an intelligent woman. So I wanna read this. And they're talking about her. She was a Hellenistic Neoplatonist philosopher, astronomer, and mathematician who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, then part of the Eastern Roman Empire. She was a prominent thinker of the Neoplatonic school in Alexandria, where she taught philosophy and astronomy. Now that is I mean, that's incredible, right? She is the first female mathematician whose life is reasonably well recorded. Okay, she also taught both Christians and non-Christians at Alexandria. Now this is where, so let's just stop there. Okay, this woman was a highly intelligent woman. She was a philosopher, astronomer, and mathematician. I mean, the girl was brilliant, right? She was in Alexandria, and she was an educator. She not only did she know these things, but she taught these things to both Christians and non-Christians. But her knowledge and what she did, instead of some people being happy and you know, gaining the insight, it was also her downfall. Okay, so this is what happened in March 415 AD, being labeled as a pagan. So now we know around this time is the early forms of Christianity during this time period. So 415 AD, she was not labeled as a philosopher, an astronomer, a mathematician. She was labeled as pagan. And because of that, she was murdered by a mob of Christians led by a lector named Peter. So now that is sad. So she has this knowledge and she's demonized for it. Okay? But I don't want us to forget this brilliant sister and what she gave and what she taught to the Christians and the non-Christians. So now I'm gonna stop there, okay? And I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna pick up, I'm gonna take a quick break, and we're gonna pick up with the Shanghaibom, the ancient African mathematics. Because I find myself, I'm kind of getting a little bit speech fatigue. So I'm gonna take a break and then we're gonna pick up from this point, okay? So I'm gonna stop sharing. And again, I wanna thank y'all for listening to me. I will be back today and I will finish this presentation. And I wanna thank everyone who had listened thus far. Black women have done some incredible things, and women in the ancient world, and these are just the women we know. There are so many women who were not recorded for their deeds. There are so many women who did not get an opportunity to be seen, but we benefit from their struggle. We benefit from what they do in the ancient world and in today. And so I look forward to finishing this, and we will continue on later today. Okay, bye-bye.